Thank you so much for joining me. And this is the Oakland Aviation Museum. Oakland is actually a great center for aviation because this is where Amelia Earhart took off on her fateful flight around the world. Her arrival has been delayed. Also, since it's Black History Month, I should mention Bessie Coleman, who was actually the first African-American woman and the first African-American and the first woman to earn an international pilot's license. And she had to do that because no one in the United States in the 20s would teach an African-American woman how to fly. And so she taught herself French, moved to France, learned how to fly, and came back here and eventually opened a flight school here at Oakland Airport, which is why the airport is dedicated to her. So if you drive in, you see the Bessie Coleman sign. So props to Bessie Coleman. That was way back in the 20s. Let me start by talking about this airplane here, since I'm right here. So this is the Douglas A3D. The A3D was created in 1949 and first flew in 1956 was when it started service. And this is actually the largest carrier-based airplane ever. You can see it's carrier-based. That's why the wings hold up on the side so they can fit more of them on the deck of the carrier. And the reason that they created this airplane was because back in the 50s, they didn't have any faster way of getting ordnance to the enemy at that time, imagining the Soviet Union, because it would take bombers from the United States 10 hours to fly there. So they figured that they would put these bombers on aircraft carriers, which they could park off the coast and have them take off and then deliver the hydrogen bomb or any other nuclear ordnance deeper into the continent if it's on the other side of the world. So that's why this was created. And so these were flying off aircraft carriers with atom bombs. But then the Navy came out with the Polaris missile, which is to be carried on submarines. And so once they had nuclear submarines with missile capability, this stopped being a bomber and they converted it to an aero tanker, and they changed it to the KA-3 Skywarrior. The K in front of any airplane designator means that it was an in-flight fueling airplane. The K stands for kerosene, of which jet fuel is made of, 50% kerosene, 50% gasoline. So what they did is they converted this. And so if you go into the bomb bay here, instead of bomb racks, you actually see this is a big rubber bladder that was filled with JP4 or jet fuel, and then it would come out the back of this hose here. And so this hose would trail behind the airplane, and then other airplanes would come up behind it, and then they would sip from the fuel nozzle that was dangling down behind the airplane. And of course, they turn off their radar. If you're flying in a jet behind the fueling tanker, you always say cold nose, meaning that you've turned your radar off. Because if your radar was on, it's like having a big microwave oven on facing this big fueling nozzle. So you don't want to do that. Now, this is a very historic airplane right here because this airplane actually saved hundreds of lives because of the heroism of this one pilot. So in 1968, Lieutenant Commander Frank Burroughs was flying this. This was a 3-crew aircraft, and to save weight, they didn't have ejection seats. And so to bail out, they would have to bail out either through the top or they would have to bail out to the bottom because they didn't have ejection seats. In fact, the pilots used to nickname the A3D, the designator of the airplane, the A3D, they nicknamed it the All Three Dead because it was so hard to get out of. Well, 1968, this airplane lost control when they were flying off of carrier off the coast of San Diego, and the airplane just started doing all these snap rolls. So it would be rolling around uncontrollably. Rolling is when you flip over upside down. And so the commander gave the order to bail out. The bombardier navigator, Lieutenant Floyd Stokes, actually stood on his chair, opened the top hatch, and then jumped out of the airplane. He jumped out of the airplane and he hit the back stabilizer here. In this specific airplane, he hit the vertical stabilizer there with his right leg. He wasn't injured too badly, but he parachuted down. And so then the pilot at the time was heading for the water. They were about 3,000 feet at this point, and the water was coming up. And he said, forgive my sexist language here, he said, "I'm going in like a man." And so he pushed the throttles full forward and gave it full power. And sure enough, the aircraft regained control. He was just going to dive into the water, but instead that power actually put the aircraft back under control. And so he ended up flying that back to Miramar and landing at full power on a long Marine Corps runway. And when he landed, as soon as he got off the runway, the engine quit because he ran out of fuel because they were full power all the way in. And what had happened is that if you see this end part here on the part of the wing that's flipped up right there, on the edge there, that's called an aileron. And that's the little control surface that goes up and down that controls the roll, how the wings make, part of how the airplane turns. So this little thing here, there's a cable that you can see, but this one little bolt about the size of your thumb had failed that connected the aileron to the control cables, and that's what caused the airplane to go out of control. If Burroughs had not landed the airplane and saved it so that they could see what happened, a lot of more planes would have gone down, because when they were able to see what happened, what failed, Douglas Aircraft examined all of their airplanes, including the DC-8s and the DC-9s, all these airplanes, and 40 of them had the same bolt that was about to fail. So those airplanes would have gone down without any sort of clue as to what happens. Any questions about the whale?
It's very cool.
Cool.